Many years ago on Thanksgiving, I think when my nephew Matt was about 5 or 6, I brought him an Advent calendar. This was one of those paper kind that you just sort of open the door and there'd be a little picture behind it. In retrospect, I might have had more success had I brought him one that had the little treasures, maybe a little piece of candy or a little toy. But I showed him this, and he knew immediately what it was and what to do with it. Without hesitation, he opened door number 25. Patience was not in that boy's DNA. Which is sort of the same for us. It may be hard for us because we do have a hard time waiting. We want to get right to the end of the story. The story of Noah and the ark is an ancient story that was retold during the time of the Babylonian exile. And if we tell that story in the way that you and I tell stories which have an end, we focus on the ending of the story. God, at the end, promises never again to destroy the earth with a flood. In that reading of the story, of course, we just want to sort of skip over the middle part, when God gets really mad and has a huge fit and destroys everything that God had made and starts over. But, wait for it, there's a rainbow at the end of the story, which makes it suitable for children. Well, the ancients didn't tell stories that way from beginning to end. In fact, they often told the story from the inside out. They used a parallel structure in telling stories. So what was said at the beginning was repeated at the end and so on until they come to the very center where there's no repetition. And the center point is the key to the story. So here's the pattern in the Noah story. Noah builds an ark. At the end, Noah builds an altar. Then Noah enters the ark, and just before the end, Noah leaves the ark. Then the waters rise, and of course the waters later begin to recede. And then there is this center point, D, that's not repeated. So this is the heart of the story. The story, as I told you, was told while the Israelites were in exile in Babylon. The temple, the place where they had encountered God, had been destroyed. Everything is in ruins. Everything has been flooded by the Babylonians. They're barely keeping their heads above water. They feel completely abandoned. They feel as if God has forgotten them. So here's the key. Chapter 8, verse 1. God remembered Noah. God remembered Noah and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And then the verse goes on, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. Well, this is important. First, we're told that God remembered Noah. And then we're told the waters recede. When you and I tell it, we start at the end. If the waters start to recede, we say, good. God hasn't forgotten us after all. Now we can see it. But Noah knew that God remembered him, that he wasn't alone in the midst of the flood. And it was after that remembering that the waters began to recede. So Jesus makes the same connection in today's gospel. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. They knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. Notice who was taken and who was left behind. Noah was the one who was left behind. All the people were swept away. Noah's the one who was left behind to give humanity a second chance. Those who were swept away disappeared. So too, Jesus insists, will be the coming of the Son of Man. So when we see violence breaking out, when things are falling apart, nothing making any sense, and people going on as if it were all normal, Paul reminds us of the times in which we live and invites us to keep awake, make ourselves ready. Salvation, he said, is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone. The day is near. So Paul urges us to lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light, not in quarreling and jealousy, instead to put on the Lord Jesus Christ. In the cross, Jesus himself became the one left behind. All the others had gotten swept up in the unanimous violence against him. He was the only one not caught up in the flood of violence toward another, and instead became its victim for our sakes. The violence washed over him, and he did not drown in it. By the power of God, the tomb was also his ark. He remained in its shelter for 3 days, and then he left it behind, empty. So in Advent, we are going to get used to hearing a still small voice that breaks in like a thief in the night. The coming is not going to happen according to our measures, nor is it likely to be picked up by us. The coming fulfillment has already begun in the cross and resurrection. The resurrection already shows us how God will finally win the day, resisting our violence with a power of life that loves us and forgives us into being made new. The one who is coming will not preside over us, but will teach us to want peace from within and to learn the habits that make it possible. The one who loves us will come as one we despise and crucify. And yet the presence of one who is powerfully determined not to let us remain wedded to our self-destruction. On that day, nations shall not lift up sword against nation. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and study war no more. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and walk in God's light.